All right, now I'm checking out my pages. Let's see.
Are we live?
I am not sure yet. I am refreshing things. Please work. All right, we are live on YouTube. We are what you doing there, Instagram?
Is that any better on sound? Better, worse? No?
Sounds roughly the same to me.
Same? Okay. I'm not going to use these
Mhm.
because they're not great.
Why are we not live on Facebook? All right. This is knew it.
There's always
Should have
one.
knocked out some wood.
Knew this was going to happen.
Oh, Sally just said she still can't log in.
Yeah, that's what. Why is this? All right. Worked on YouTube.
Hi, people of YouTube. I'm just doing what I see other people do on lives. I don't know. I don't even know if anybody's there.
Facebook. Ah, wait. I think I got it.
Okay. You can do it.
I did not get it. I can do this. I know I can. Do I have to save it on every single one? Oh, all right. All right. Really? Facebook is all right. Yeah. Verify I'm human. We may just sacrifice Instagram for sake of time. Yeah, because I'm not logged in on my laptop. We are sacrificing Instagram, but we are still doing 2 platforms. That is good. We connected on Facebook. Can we do it? It's thinking about it.
How do we log on? Sally said.
You don't need to log on. She doesn't need to log on. It's just as soon as I can.
The live starts.
Yeah. It says we are live. Continue to Facebook. All right, we are live. It says we are live. Yep, we are live on Facebook. If she goes to the home page, she'll see us. Okay. And all she has to do is click it. All right, so welcome. Thank you for joining us for our first live with the Global Women's Caucus. I'm Jasmine. I live in Albania. I vote in North Carolina, and I work in marketing for the Global Women's Caucus. And then we have Chloe.
Hi, I currently live in Spain. I am one of the graphic designers, but I am also a military spouse. And then I vote in California. And then
And we have Elizabeth from the Global Women's Caucus.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and I'm currently based in the Netherlands, and I volunteer for the Global Women's Caucus, and I do social media stuff, and I vote in California.
And then joining us is Libby from the VMF, the Veterans and Military Family Caucus.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm Libby. I live in Morocco now, and I'm a Washington State voter. I grew up in Washington as the daughter of a Navy veteran. My brothers are both Marines, and I spent 20 years as a Navy spouse myself. Didn't learn my lesson growing up as a Navy brat. And I'm a lawyer by background. I spent 7 years at the VA, and then I had the great honor to work for Dr. Biden on her military families initiative, as well as on the Harris campaign on doing their veteran and military family outreach. So I'm super glad to have found DA when I came overseas, and excited to be here for this conversation.
Well, we're really glad to have you. One of the reasons we wanted to start doing these lives is because women are 51% of the population, and issues that affect one caucus tend to affect women. And I think it's important that we remember that we're all voting, we're all on the same side. And that a lot of the issues do affect cross caucus. So we had talked previously leading up to this about some of the issues that the VMF really focuses on. And we wanted to start with the recognition of veterans, because we've seen, especially with the current administration, that they are trying to minimize or erase women in particular, but a lot of service members from records, diminish their accomplishments, ignore the sacrifices the families of military members make altogether. So how does that show up in day-to-day realities for women or for veterans?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Oh,
you want to
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. You can go first.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, it has been really troubling watching this administration's approach. I mean, on so many things, but I think really painful for women in the military connected community to watch, especially at DOD, some of these really talented, just kick-ass women, if I can say that, be pulled from their positions that they earned by being just as good, if not many times better than their peers. And what it really, I think, creates for a lot of, at DOD, at VA, is all of this hard work that has been done over decades to advance women just being undercut. And even with that work being done, women veterans, maybe you go and park in the veteran spot at Home Depot and someone says, "What are you doing? That's for veterans." And you have to say, "I am a veteran," because that's not the image that folks have. And that happens at VA. We were talking before we came on live about the bureaucracy and the joys of filing a claim at VA. And it's already hard enough, but when you have to go in and prove that you're the veteran and not the family member, it just adds these layers. And for someone who's maybe already struggling with medical or mental health issues, to be told, your service doesn't matter the same way that a man's does, is just really, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it is, it's really disturbing, and it's just setting us back decades and decades.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because I mean, as a spouse, I'm surrounded by active military all the time. I mean, and we're still, I'm still in it. We only have a couple more years before I'm on the other side. But it's really just, I think it's disheartening to all of us, because especially for those active duty women, you do have to be better. You can't mess up the same way. You can't complain, because are we allowed to curse on this? Am I?
If we can keep it to a minimum.
Okay. Well, then
Think of it as the Samuel L. Jackson rules.
Okay. Well, you're labeled to, you're bossy, I'm just gonna say you're the bitch, right? Like you're not the same with the guy does it, then you're labeled all these things. So these are things that every woman has to deal with, but then in a very male centric workplace, it's another layer. And then with the focus on the current administration of ripping away all of the representation, it makes it an even more hostile work environment that you're in. And even as a spouse, sometimes when you walk on a naval base, like you don't know who has certain views and what they think of you. Like you have to be very careful about what you say and who you say it to. So that's also regardless if you're active duty or not. Like um, it can feel very hostile sometimes in this current administration just to go to the commissary. And if I decide I'm going to listen to my super liberal radio, then who might say something or who's going to give me a weird look. So.
And I think some folks may not understand the system that we're operating within here, which is, a lot of what the infrastructure that exists at DoD and VA was created post World War II. There's been some great advancements, but the reality is, I think a lot of military families would say, and veterans navigating VA as well, is a lot of what has been put in place is outdated, and we're operating in a patriarchal, not always technologically advanced. I mean, there are layers to what needs to be updated and advanced. And so even prior to this administration, I think it was a struggle for many, many folks, including women, to feel that they were respected in their roles, were given the same opportunities, were not having to maybe fight that uphill battle at VA to get some of this care that has not always existed for women. And so, it was already that challenge. And then to have all of this, outright hostility come in towards women, and we're seeing women leaders removed, healthcare for women removed. I think it is a really challenging message for those in uniform and for the families to think about, like, what am I actually being valued, and how do I continue in a system that is openly hostile? And so, we talk about this on a human level, but there is also a national security piece to it too. How do we continue to recruit women and people who are not white males to serve? And right now we're saying, like, yeah, come and serve, but we don't actually value your labor. And so what is that going to do to our recruiting and retention that's already struggling?
Or to regulate you to what are considered women roles, right? Like go work in healthcare. Like you can't go help out in any combat role. You'd have no value there. That's kind of what the administration has definitely been saying as of lately. Like you do not have value on the combat field, which is a slap into the face of all of those women who went and served in combat roles. They obviously have value. Like I've talked to my husband about this, who is a very vanilla white male. He grew up in Iowa. You know what I mean? He was a small town Iowa, cornbread young man, right? Like he is your stereotypical man. And, he's even talked about, like, if anybody's willing to go put their life out there, to serve those roles, and if you can meet the standards that were there before, because they seem to be just fine, then you should be able to serve out there and be in those roles. Like, that's just
I
how
know
it is.
that's something we heard about last year with Hegseth taking women out of the field but they're doing the same tests. They're passing the same fitness tests. They deserve the same appreciation.
Yes, I mean, there are some tweaks to it so that they make it fair for both men and women. But like, there is a high standard in those roles. Not, you know what I mean? Like, you do have to, especially when you start working in like or I'll speak from my experience, but like the naval special warfare section of all that stuff, there's even more higher standards that you have to meet. So as long as you meet those standards, you should be able to serve in those combat roles. Like, and there are women that have been able to meet those standards. So why is it an issue? Why is it an issue that somebody, a human being, regardless of gender, is wanting to give up potentially their life to go, for our rights and our freedoms? Like, that's what they're doing. When you sign on that dotted line, there's always a chance, regardless of how small it is, if you do it in peacetime or in wartime, there's always a chance that you could be called up, and you're saying that you're willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. So what does it matter?
And we've seen, it's not about the standards. I think we all have seen how that can be used against women. But as we saw with the treatment of the transgender members who were not even given an opportunity to meet standards, they just said,
no,
you are, we don't deem you worthy of service, even though you have met and exceeded in many cases the standards that we put out for you. We don't care. We're not even giving you an opportunity to meet some arbitrary new standards that we're making up. You're just not allowed to serve anymore. And honestly, it's one of the most shameful things I've seen, the way that we treated these folks. Some, not even giving an actual retirement or offboarding ceremony. It's absolutely disgusting. And it just shows, like, this is not about standards. This is just about enforcing their view of who is fit and who is appropriate to serve under, Pete Hegseth's definition of a warrior.
Speaking actually of leadership, like, how do these appointments influence the culture, like, around gender equity in the military? I know before we logged on, you had mentioned, like, working with Dr. Jill Biden, and I guess what are efforts like that go into combating, like, these stereotypes? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, not being openly hostile is a great.
That definitely helps, right?
Yeah, it's a great start.
Helps.
But there were so many folks, I knew so many people, and worked on some of the efforts to try and push back on these appointments, including Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel, in these really important national security positions, because it is important to have leaders who value and honor that service so that people can show up every day and do their jobs and pay attention to their jobs and not be worried about whatever, like, crazy thing Kash Patel decides to run off and pay attention to, whatever UFC fight he's flying out to this week, or Pete Hegseth, like, flying around to do push-ups with the SEALs, or, wherever, whatever, like, fun summer camp activities they're off to. And so I just can only imagine how difficult it is for folks who are currently serving to continue to do so in an environment that is, it's not just not supportive. It's not like the don't ask, don't tell, which, not that I'm endorsing that, but this is actively hunting people out and rooting them out of positions. There was even, I can't remember, there's been so many, but there was a Navy, I think he was up for admiral or up for a certain position, but because he had done drag, which anybody that knows Navy knows that they do these, like, shows on the ships when they're out at sea for months at a time, like, they're just dressing up and doing silly skits or whatever. And that tanked his nomination, and so this is, like, real people's lives. All to fit this, again, an agenda of what Pete Hegseth or Donald Trump deems is an actual warrior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're definitely basically trying to turn the clock back as far back as possible. responsible, right? Like, you know, I've had this conversation with my mom, who is an actual veteran. She served for 8 years. She was a corpsman in the U.S. Navy, and like she talks about like what it was back in the day. Like you just had to shut up and do your job. Like that's what you were expected to do as a woman. Like they would say and do things, and that would clearly sexual harassment, but that was just part of it. Like they're guys just being guys doing the locker, locker talk stuff. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think some of that, like she raised me a little bit to be like that. So it's been trying to like unlearn some of that generational stuff, because that's what she knew. I mean, things have changed, and they do, um, they have trainings and they talk about it, but at least I think people, don't get me wrong, there was still a huge problem in the military with sexual harassment and all that stuff. But I think there was a push to try and make it better for women to feel safer. And they don't feel that way. Like they're taking away a lot of that and pushing it back to being like, just shut up and do your job. And I'm going to apologize. I have an 11-year-old, so sometimes she will come in.
Okay.
Of course.
More the merrier.
So with that, you had spoken earlier on getting healthcare through the VA, and I know that there has been funding cuts, staffing cuts in the VA, all of which has reduced access to healthcare, which women already, in general, suffer from healthcare access issues, despite being a larger part of the population that is more likely to have complicated, complex illnesses, I believe they're called medically, and long-term invisible disabilities, that sort of thing. So let's talk about that. What are the healthcare cuts actually looking like on the ground for veterans or for active military families?
Yeah, I can speak on the veterans, on the veterans piece. I think, and I will say, as a former VA employee, what I saw was folks really actually appreciated VA care when they could get in the door. It gets very high, rankings, and some of it, it's best in class. The struggle is that access, and that's where a lot of folks, getting into the system, getting enrolled, getting those appointments. And I think a lot of people can relate to that, healthcare in general in the country right now. And so anything that makes that even harder than it already was is not great, right? Obviously. But I think it's not just a question of like, oh, okay, then someone is maybe not getting in the door. Folks are already burned out. And, we were talking again about the challenges that come with transition from the military. It's a really tough time for folks who have worn the uniform maybe since they were 18 until, they're 40. They put on the uniform every day. Now they're in a completely new world and navigating all of that. Maybe they're adrift trying to figure out what their next mission is going to be. And so anything that makes it harder to access that care is a real negative. And sometimes means maybe they aren't going to make the effort, and they're not going to get the screenings that they need. They're not going to address some of those complex conditions, like you mentioned, that do need more attention. And so, yeah, it's a really huge problem. And the other thing I would say is like the staffing piece of it is so huge. And the VMF caucus just sent in a letter to the leaders in Congress to, share our concerns about this. And, they're cutting massive numbers of folks at VA, which I don't understand the logic to say in any way that we can provide better healthcare for our veterans by cutting 30,000, 80,000. I mean, we all know, like, maybe you can trim the fat here and there, but those are massive numbers. And I just think it is laughable to say that in some way that is going to help veterans get better healthcare and benefits. And the last thing I will say on the staffing piece too is about 30% of federal employees are veterans. So it's like this double whammy. You're firing the people who are trying to serve veterans, and a lot of them are veterans, and a lot of them are military families as well. And so you're taking those paychecks away and economically, devastating some of these families with that job loss. So it's bad on the healthcare level. It's bad on the economic level. Like, it just does not make sense, and it's bad policy all around.
Yeah, no, for sure. All of the things that you said. And then on top of it, like, as somebody who's about to retire, like, TRICARE is probably one of the most affordable healthcare plans for military families after they get out. So I mean, it just means, like you said, longer wait times. They're taking away money from, for veterans. For me, we're not quite there yet. The biggest thing that affects my life is all of just the policy part of it, of what is JFK Jr. going to, what new thing do I have to worry about? Can my kid get vaccinated? Right? Like, she's a little girl. So now I have to worry about, like, can I make sure that I get her in time so that she can get her the HPV vaccine? Like, before they start taking away these things that are healthcare for my child, right? And that affects, veterans too, because if they have children that are around the same age, like, hopefully they can get that kind of care through the VA before policies change, and then if they can't get it because it's not covered anymore, that's money that's coming out of my pocket to try and find somebody that will give my child those kind of vaccines, right? I mean, like I said, I can't speak to the veteran part yet because we're not there, but, like, for me, that's what affects my life the most, is just, like, what are the major healthcare policies that affect everybody else that affects us, and it makes it harder.
I think that's a really good point. And then, I mean, veterans have the option to go into private care, but it doesn't get smoother, especially for women. When you get there, and it's
No.
expensive, and it's still not, I think, fast. I think we all experienced that when we were still in the States.
Oh yeah, but for vets, it's even slower because the staffing.
Yeah.
Like, that was the biggest thing. I forgot. Basically, everybody that got hired during the Biden administration, they cut, which made wait times much better. They just destroyed all of that. And I'm gonna be on my soapbox for a second. Like, it really just makes me so angry because they use the military as, like, this prop, right? Like, but then, sorry, I may cry, but when it's time to take care of them, they don't. And it's sad.
This is
sad.
something we've talked about so much in the Women's Caucus, is that some symbols of our country have been hijacked, and they claim, oh, we don't support the military. But frankly, by stripping the resources, they're the ones not supporting the military. We are trying to get healthcare and mental health services and support for military members, for veterans, for their families who, being a military family, I've never done it, but being a military family, I know from having lived near a base for a while, is not easy. It's not nothing. It's not no sacrifice.
No, I mean, yeah.
And it required support.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, as I will speak as from a spouse, I have to give up a lot to support my husband's career, basically. I don't have maybe the career that I envisioned when I got out of school because I chose to marry somebody in the military. And part of that is I move around a lot. I'm lucky that I do kind of have a job that I can work remotely from, but we kind of touched on this a little earlier off the live, but a lot of women have to give up their careers to be with their husbands or the spouse, because there are some men who give up their career to be with their wife, who are active military. It's a small number, but they're there. So I don't want to diminish that. But a large women have to give up and sacrifice a lot to support their families when they're active military.
Yeah.
It just, unfortunately, like, that's how it goes.
But I think that's, to your point, is, that's almost expected or assumed that, of course, the woman spouse will trail the service member. But when it is a woman service member, they're like, oh my gosh, your husband is willing to give up their job. It's these incredibly different expectations. And I think that's, another thing is we talk about how the service of women is valued. It's like, I have a lot of friends who are active service members, and they debate staying because they're like, I don't know, does somebody want to be with me when they have to be in this lifestyle? Because that is hard for a lot of men, I think, to envision that, just because of the patriarchy.
Yeah. I mean, and it's really hard in general. Even for the women, like, I'll speak for me. When we moved from San Diego to London, that first year was really hard, because I don't think I realized, like, how much my identity was tied into work and not having, well, first it was COVID, so there's not anything going on. But when I could, it was really hard, because, being overseas makes it even harder for spouses to work. And that mental, like, having to change, like, be like, I will be okay, was really hard for, like, that first year, to be like, oh, I can be somebody outside of my job.
Yeah. There was one other thing I wanted to say on staffing too, to go back to that. These cuts are making it really challenging within the VA system. First of all, I mean, not every veteran qualifies for that, right? And so a lot of folks are out in the private system already. And just like a lot of the private systems, VA already struggled to recruit providers, nurses, folks to work. I think it's always been a challenge in the federal workforce to get younger folks in, right? And so it's kind of similar with what we were talking about with DOD and how the treatment of women and minorities, like, what message are we sending? What impact is that going to have on recruiting and retention? The same thing happens at VA when you dump on, and I mean, all of the agencies are in this same boat, but it's really critical at VA because we know we have a challenge with medical providers in the US to begin with. Now, how is VA going to compete to bring in, the best and the brightest medical providers when this is how we're treating them? And so I think it's a really, again, short-sighted and terrible policy for veterans and caregivers and everybody who has to interact with that system to be treating, treating the staff like that, the staff that is our lifeline, as the veterans and families navigating that. So I think that's another piece to it. And then if I can say one other thing that Chloe reminded me of is, I think it's such a challenge sometimes to talk in the military and veteran community about being a Democrat. Like, why are you a Democrat? Like, what have the Democrats ever done for the military? And like you said, it's like the GOP is kind of appropriated like patriotism and the military and rah. But we saw with the Biden administration pass the PACT Act, which is like one of the most significant pieces of legislation for this community in decades. And it just expanded the bandwidth to take care of veterans who were exposed to toxic exposures, burn pits. It really opened the door. And we made a mistake with Vietnam veterans and how we took a really long time to right that wrong with Agent Orange. And I think folks, even though veterans literally had to camp out on the steps of Congress to pass the PACT Act and like shame Republican senators into voting for it. It happened. But to Chloe's point, it was like, so then the administration had to hire all of these people because we opened the doors to take care of more veterans, which we should. Like you said, we come up with the money to pay to send these folks to war, and then we don't have money to take care of them when they come back. And so they did a lot of work, the executive branch, Congress, together, like you're supposed to do that and staff the VA. And then this administration has come in, and how can you, again, fire 30,000, 80,000, how many ever they want to do ultimately, at the same time as expanding services? Like the math just does not math there.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. And then taking some of that money and diverting it into DHS and all these other things. And it's like, that's not where that money should be going. That's not what Congress appropriated it for.
And just before we go on to the next discussion, this question is related to kind of like healthcare and mental health specifically. So I'm just thinking there's like this idea in some parts of the military culture, but I think even just wider society, that like asking for help in this respect for mental health is considered weak. And so like, how does this affect like veterans and families trying to access this type of healthcare?
I mean, I don't think it's helpful, right? Like, there's definitely a push for a while there about because I don't remember. I mean, maybe you know what the statistics are on suicide in the military, but it's high. Like it's really high. And so there was a really big push for a long time about like, you need help, get help, like trying to destigmatize it. And now we're going back to this like macho, masculine, facade, right? Of like, where if you have a feeling, somehow you're a wuss or whatever. So it's not helpful. Like it wasn't great to begin with because a lot of active duty in general don't like to go get help or ask for it to begin with. But I think it's even worse because just the culture that they're making is to not go get help, because then you're not a man.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talked about, again, before we came on the live, there are a lot of folks in the military who are like, I don't want to get that because it's going to take me out of my qualifications, or, and some of those, I understand that, right? Like you still want to be able to fly or whatever your certification is. You don't want something to interfere with that. And so like Chloe said, like there had been such work over years and years to really destigmatize that. And I think there's been some really great leaders who have shown by example, like I'm setting aside, 1 p.m. on Thursday to go to my therapy appointment and, like really demonstrate that. And so I think folks see someone like Hegseth, like, oh, what's the problem with bringing back the warrior ethos? Like that sounds great in theory, but they don't think about those ripple effects and what that means. And again, as you are a veteran, navigating transition, you had this mission in life and you knew you're going to wake up every day and serve your country. You knew what you were going to wear, where you're going to eat, like so much is directed when you're in the military, and now you're adrift sometimes post-service. Yeah. And this bureaucracy and this attitude about, like Chloe said, just be a man and suck it up, is really quite harmful. And for, again, going back to kind of our first conversation too, for women, where it's like, it's already challenging to go in and get some of this treatment. And when you go in and you're going to be asked, like, are you a veteran or are you the spouse? Like, what are you doing here? Or you're sitting in a waiting room, with, and there's no other women veteran, it's just these pieces that already make it challenging. And I don't see this administration doing much to address that and push the positive messaging that actually helps folks get into that treatment that they need.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. One of the comments we received, which I'm going to show on the screen, actually leads us into the next topic we had wanted to discuss. Obviously, ICE is a hot topic right now. They have been up to some things. But one of the things that people don't realize is it is suspected, because there are not fully accurate, fully verified numbers, but it is suspected that tens of thousands of our active service members have spouses, parents, or children who are undocumented. In the 2010s, a few hundred veterans were deported. They expect over the next year or so, under the current administration's rules and guidelines, that that number will shoot up into the thousands. These are people who fought for our country. These are people who fought for our country and now face deportation themselves, or are fighting for our country and face coming home to their family being missing with potentially no warning. How does the threat of deportation and ICE's current actions affect focus, readiness, mental health during service and afterwards?
Well, it doesn't. Like, I think it's just as simple as that. When you have to work, like, what makes my little family unit work right now for us is that when he goes home or when he goes to work or he does whatever it is he does, he knows that I'm safe, that me and Eloise are safe. So he doesn't have to think about that, right? Like I said, he's a white guy from Iowa, so he doesn't have to worry about his family, where like other people do. And then the thought of sometimes just traveling to go home, even as somebody who has status, has become a topic where people are really nervous about just going to go try and visit your family, right? Like, it's, if you are not the right shade of white, then it is a concern about people going home to visit their family, documented, undocumented. But if they're undocumented, that's a whole nother level of worry that you're putting on somebody who you're trying to have that warrior focus. Like, their minds are being split in different ways because they're worried about getting a phone call that their family has been disappeared into a system, that they can't find them, that it's even more hard to navigate. Like, it almost seems impossible to navigate sometimes.
And yeah, this is not a hypothetical. Like, they have gone onto base and taken military family members. There was a mother in Arizona, I think it was Yuma, where the male service member was working. His wife, who had previously been a Marine but was now a civilian, I think had surgery, and they had brought one of their mothers to the base to help them with childcare. And, very familiar scenario for military families who maybe don't have family close by. So you bring your family from another state to come help you out because you're new and you don't know anybody. And they picked her, they took the mom, not, immigration issues aside, now leaving that family where the service member still has to go into work every day, right? And his wife is at home trying to recover and now has to take care of, it's like, it's inhumane on so many levels. So like, this is not a hypothetical at all. I think we've all seen a lot of the headlines. And like you were saying, it impacts readiness. Like, how is a service member supposed to go to work? Not just when they're concerned about this, but some of the spouses have been deported. And then where does the kid, if you have a kid and you're working every day in the military and potentially deploying, like, again, the math does not math. And I think this is yet another example of where Republican policy shows that they do not give a shit about these families. Sorry again for swearing, but like, that there were written policies in place for family members who were going through the process and doing everything right to have deportation delayed if they had a service member in a military family member. That policy has been tossed aside. And I just cannot think of a more concrete example of disrespect for military families than to trash a policy like that and say, we actually don't care if you're serving our country. We're going to deport your loved one anyway. Like, it's just absolutely disgusting and devastating for these families.
Oh yeah, and especially like for some of the veterans that have been deported, right? Like a lot of them, they don't know any. America has always been home, and they got into they got into the military as a way to like show that they love this country that took them in, and then B, as a way to like gain their citizenship, like try and do it the legal way. And here we are because they might have had a bad year and did, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of them, they just had like a drug charge, like not even a big one, and got deported. That's a slap in the face. Yeah, and like you said, it just shows that they don't care at all about it. Not maybe there's a few, I won't generalize, but it doesn't feel like it.
And actually, there's been reporting that some recruiters are still using this as a way to recruit, to say, hey, come in the military. There's these protections for your family, or we're going to help you get citizenship. So it's not just that they are taking this away, like you said, from veterans who have already completed their service, or even families that are currently serving. It's like this really gross manipulation where they're still trying to pretend like they care and will give these protections, knowing that they're not. And so it's horrific to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I just listening to both of you, I really just wonder, what does this really say about like our national values? It's like, we just don't, there's this no caring. I mean, and it's really like we've kind of been discussing before, from the top down. And it's, how do we counter this? And like, because I know there's so many, just as much hate as there is, just as much like broken, dark hearts. I know that there's an equally beautiful side of America that is filled with care, that wants to help people. And so it's just such a mashup of these two extremes. And yeah, it's not a comment or question. It's just trying to process all of this.
And I will say there has been legislation introduced, which the VMF caucus has endorsed several of those pieces to try and address this and take, things like that policy and really put it into statute and make it, if anyone is still paying attention to the rule of law in this country, to try and move forward. Because I do think there are folks on, both sides of the aisle that can see why this is a benefit. Again, maybe not on the human level, which is unfortunate, but to look at it from a national security perspective and say, in order to continue recruiting and retaining and not have morale be completely in the dumpster even more than it already is, there's a reason these policies were put in place in the first place. And they are valuable. And so, like I said, the VMF caucus has endorsed several of those. And I think that's something that people can, reach out to their members of Congress on and say, like, again, if you say you support the military, this should be a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Really.
And you post about these on the VMF's Facebook so that people know what to support and when something's coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. Michael and the caucus crew do a great job of reviewing and endorsing a lot of different pieces of legislation, and then pushing that out on our Facebook and Instagram, and internally for our caucus members as well, so they can see which what we've endorsed, and also what we've said is like, that's a terrible idea.
Yeah. So the last big thing, and talking about what we can do, connects into our last topic, which is voting. We often sound like a broken record over here at DA, whether we're in the GWC or the VMF, but voting is really our most powerful tool, because if we vote in better politicians, we will have better results. And with this being a midterm year and with the current administration, there have been multiple attacks on overseas voting in particular. So we have UOCAVA, which is essentially the framework that allows for overseas voting, designed for military members, but it also works for expats, regardless of why you're overseas. Let's talk about some of the barriers we're seeing come into place. For instance, in Maine last year, there was on the ballot, it did get voted down, but on the ballot was to require ID to vote, which would require people who are overseas who weren't registered to have to actually fly back to the States, for instance. So what other barriers are we seeing?
One of the ones that I thought was really interesting was in Arizona, again, a Republican-led effort to stop folks who had not, I guess, physically lived in the state from voting. And people might not think about how that would impact, military kids, diplomat kids, folks who maybe they were born over, well, the parents are stationed in Spain and then they went to Germany and maybe they bounced around, overseas. Yeah. And maybe they went back and were stationed in, Florida or something, but they're voting in Arizona because that's where their parents vote and that's where they maintain their residency. And so there's some of these things that, again, maybe sound like common sense when they first say them, but you actually think about the ripple effects and who that's going to exclude are really damaging.
Yeah. No, for sure. Because when you don't really have a home, right? Like, I haven't had a home in 6 years, because we've been bouncing around. It makes it hard to meet these requirements. And then especially for kids that were born overseas and your parents maybe forget to get you a real birth certificate, like a physical one. Those are all kinds of barriers that people don't have to think about. Right.
Yeah. And I think this is also one of those bureaucracy moments too. Again, we were talking about before we came on, I'm a lawyer. I got involved in this advocacy because every state has different rules about how they license lawyers. I'm sure a lot of people can relate. It's like that if you're, a cosmetologist, or a lot of different professions have that. But you had to take the bar exam essentially every time we PCS'd around to a different duty station, which is nobody wants to take the bar exam one time, let alone there was one woman in our group who was admitted in 8 different jurisdictions. I was like, that will never be me. I will never take that many bar exams. But right, it's the same with voting, which is the states have the right to set, their voting rules. And so what UOCAVA tries to do, at least for the federal election level, is provide some, maybe it doesn't always achieve that, but, some stability for families so that there is a method that is not, through this confusing, people still have to deal with the state bureaucracy. That is not completely out, but there is an effort to at least have a pathway for folks to vote. And I think that's really the benefit of something like UOCAVA.
Yeah, but when you're trying to vote in your states and you're not sure about your residency and what are your requirements for residency, that makes it that's a whole other level, because state voting is just as important as federal, especially if that's the state you're planning to go back to, right? If you want to go back to wherever it is, state voting on those lower levels is just as important as on the macro. It does. It makes it hard. And maybe just speaking from some personal experience with active military, I think apathy plays a really big part into it for active military, because they're I hear it all the time. They're like, oh, I don't vote because it doesn't matter. It's the same. It's just the same stuff, different guy. Obviously not this time, but in the past, it's been a little bit more whoever they're going to put in, it's still a bunch of BS. And that BS just changes from an R to a D, or
back and forth,
right? Just back and forth. So a lot of it is apathy, and especially when you have a lot of those white guys that feel, they're like, this doesn't affect me. You sometimes have to be, especially like I've done this to my husband. I was like, well, it might not affect you, but it sure affects me. It affects your daughter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So having those
Mhm.
conversations with, if you have people that that are active military and they're like, I don't vote because whatever, it does affect them just in other ways or people around them. It's making sure that people understand that, yes, the system feels really broken and there are things that we have to do, but we at least have to try at the moment to work with what we got and then do other advocacy to try and make things better. But this is what we got right now. It may not feel perfect, but we got to vote. You got to do those things.
Yeah, and I think
It's
there's
fun.
also this notion in the military community of being apolitical, which is, I understand again from the service member, in a lot of ways they are, they can't necessarily participate in something like this. They can't be in, partisan politics and donation. I mean, there are a lot of rules on the
Yeah.
actual service member. Voting is not one of those, though, because my ex-husband used to say that too, like, oh, I don't want to vote because then if the other person, it's like, well, it's actually your civic duty. Like, you are out here putting your life on the line and you're not vote. Like, come on. So it's like, I get it, but I also think, especially in the environment that we are in right now, it's so important. And a lot of families sometimes buy into that as well. But I'm like, you guys, we're not bound by the same rules as the service member. And I actually think, I mean, military families are so uniquely impacted by federal decision makers who decide, DOD funding, how much of that is going to go into child care, how much of that is going to help spouse employment, what are the BAH rates going to be, where are we starting a war, where is my service member going to have to potentially deploy to? I mean, there are so many things. If you think about how the life of a military family member and veterans too, when you think about everything that is controlled at VA and within that ecosystem, like their lives are impacted by congressional, especially decision making in a really
or non-decision making.
right, or lack. Yes, we're approaching this potential shutdown again. Like, are people even going to get a paycheck here next month? We saw how that impacted military families last year with record numbers showing up at food banks and really reaching out for assistance because of all of that uncertainty and upheaval. So I think it's almost like yes, I understand the apolitical nature of the military, but at the same time, when your life is so uniquely controlled by these decision makers, like you have to be weighing in. And maybe even if you didn't vote, you should still be calling them and telling them what you think, but then make sure you're voting on top of that too. Like, we're really, the voices in this community are so powerful. And especially for families who don't have those restrictions, they should absolutely be participating.
Oh yeah, because I will say this is like, as much as they use us as a political pawn, like we should be doing the same thing, because when you have, it is really shameful because I lived in San Diego for a really long time. And we had food banks for active military. So because their paycheck didn't go far enough, especially when they're, first enlisted and living in places like California. Whew, like some people had like 4 kids, and I was like, how are you doing that on an E1 salary?
Yeah.
Like, that's insane. I'm barely scraping by. And we were higher up at the time. So like, yeah, like voting, like it's just shameful. And like I said, we should be using our voices because they like to use us as political pawns. And so like, let's do it back. Let's reclaim some of that for ourselves.
Amen.
I think-
Totally agree.
I think it's important to point out military and overseas ballots are rejected at higher rates than domestic ballots. So there is active intent to reduce those. We have more rules. We have to follow stricter rules and such that are harder. So, which is one of the reasons we all talk about, request your ballot early, return it early, so that if there's an issue, you have time to fix it,
Yes.
to adapt.
Especially if
Military
you're on
kids tend to be the ones who have never lived in the States and therefore are more affected by, if you've never set foot in the state, if you've never lived in the state, you can't vote in this state because it disenfranchises them completely. I think those are things we really have to, and military members, you may have been stationed, you may have your residency in one place, have been stationed in another state right before deployment. And then there's the question of, where do you vote? Where is technically, because you don't want your vote rejected. And it's not like they have the time to sit there and play with it and track down through bureaucracy.
It's a pain. And then you just gotta especially if you're on an installation, sometimes mail is not always the most reliable. Like usually it's pretty good, but that does not mean that sometimes if any kind of hiccup happens, or let's be real, the military just being the military, things can take a long time. Just because. So, if you're on an installation, you definitely need to get your ballot out sooner than later.
And check, we were talking about how different it is state to state. Washington State is fantastic. And I have to say, actually worked a little bit with their former Secretary of State, who was a Republican, but had been a military spouse stationed overseas and felt the pain of trying to vote and deal with all of that. And so was supportive of some Washington is incredibly forward leaning when it comes to vote by mail. I actually can go to an online portal, get my ballot, fill it out, email it back. So I think it's important, check what your state offers, like email, fax.
Yes.
There are options. If mail is the last resort, some states you still do have to do that, but make sure you're doing your, your research to register, get your ballot, and then turn it in. But some of them, like I said, Washington fortunately makes it very, very easy. And
California is pretty good too.
Yeah. And then you can track it too once you send it in and see okay, they actually received it, they actually counted it. To your point earlier about the attacks on or how these ballots are rejected at a higher rate. We saw that in 2024. They were, Pennsylvania and North Carolina were literally targeting overseas and military voters. And so, it's even once you send it off, you still have to track it, especially if you're in these states that are really hostile, to make sure that it actually gets counted.
And if you check it in enough time, you can actually get things amended and get it fixed. So that's the main thing, is to be able to fix those things if they get rejected. So sooner you do it, the easier it is to fix it.
So how do we stay politically involved while we're abroad? Obviously voting. We have the FPCA. You can vote through that site, or you can vote through votefromabroad.org. I know Liz, who works over there, is going to want me to plug that. But I think it's not just that, right? There's other things we have to do, like, as you said, sending letters to senators or calling. Telling stories of what we've experienced.
Yeah. All of those things. And then even just at small levels of having conversations with your family, right? And having those hard conversations. I had a family vacation recently ruined by having some of those hard conversations. It's not fun. Nobody likes doing it, but I think that it needs to be had, because I'm really tired of people saying well, both were awful options. No, it wasn't. There's one clearly bad option. You can't tell me that now. You just can't say that to me now. So, having, like I said, the macro stuff is really important, but doing some of those small things that sometimes feel like they take a little bit more courage is just as important. Talking to people, having those hard conversations, making sure that your people are registered to vote. Like I said, doing small things are just as important as the big things.
Yeah, and I think there are plenty of ways to stay plugged in, in our digital age, fortunately.
Or unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I moved overseas to escape this, but I actually can't. Yeah. But you can still call. Maybe the time difference is a challenge. Leave a voicemail for your members of Congress. Email if you're emailing them, like do it through their website, because a lot of times that's logged the same way as calls. You go on their website, you'll ask like, what are you emailing me about? Like check their little boxes so that they can tally you up with all of the calls. I think that's really important to be heard. I still, with actually Michael from the VMF caucus, we did a Zoom call with my member of Congress's, my representative's office to say, hey, we want your support for this bill. And so, that's still possible. And I always encourage military families too, to think about where you're stationed. Maybe not for overseas necessarily, but maybe you vote in Arizona, but you're stationed in Florida. Double dip. You're maybe not technically a constituent, but you're living in that state because the government has told you like your service member has to serve there. And so, I think your voice is important there as well. And then there's groups, obviously I will pitch our caucus for any veterans and military families who aren't already a member. There is really great work done, like I said, reviewing a lot of this legislation, deciding whether to endorse or say like, no, this is actually a terrible idea. Please don't do this. There's a great, information sent out all the time, opportunities to write op-eds, and have your voice be heard, through letters to the editor and that kind of thing. There's also a really great virtual museum on the Democrats Abroad website where folks can go and see the stories of veterans and military families. So there's a lot of ways to get involved, through the caucuses and through Dems Abroad as well.
Yeah, finding Democrats abroad has just been so much fun. I moved to the Netherlands. It was kind of on my way to California, and I haven't really totally, settled into society here. So it's really given just me this outlet to kind of create, because as a creative, there's just so much going on, and it's hard again to process everything, with Minnesota recently, but also just everything going on in the world. I think, often going abroad, it feels like you kind of lost your voice because you feel like you're watching things passively go by. And it's like, what effort can I really make? Or what impact can I make? And so it truly is just wonderful to have an organization like Democrats Abroad, or, there's so many other organizations like Indivisible, but I'm not going to really rep them right now. But so it's just great. And I just want to say thank you, ladies, for joining this. It's just been really inspiring.
Yeah, I'll echo. Go for it, Jazz. I talked a lot.
I think Democrats Abroad and the Global Women's Caucus has done the same for me. I don't have the ties to the military, of course, but it gives me an outlet because I sit here with so much frustration sometimes and you feel helpless. And it got to a point where I basically just ignored the news because I couldn't sit there and not do anything. And then I found Democrats Abroad and the Global Women's Caucus, and it gives me something tangible. And when I get angry, I just do more.
Yeah.
Our marketing team has been very active this week since Alex Pretty's death because we're angry and we want to make change, and we're going to see that come to fruition with the shutdown, most likely, as they try and block funding. $10 billion to fund ICE, which is huge, and would help them run unchecked. And we do have Democrats who are standing up against it and willing to block the bill. And that shutdown is not going to be pleasant for military members.
No, I mean, and I've been really proud because they've been interviewing a lot of veterans, especially in Minnesota, and talking about how truly upset they are because this is what they fought for. You know, they put their lives on the line to not have these things happen in their own country.
Yeah.
And so I've been really proud just to see, because I think there is this perception that veterans and military is just so very conservative. Don't get me wrong, there is that sect that's in there, but there's a lot of us that are not. You know, I love America, but I don't need to wear it head to toe to show how much I am proud of my country. I think the fact that I have married somebody that's active duty and willing to sacrifice some of the things that I have sacrificed should prove that I love my country just as much as the guy that has the 2 flags on his truck and has never had to sacrifice anything in his life. So
Yeah.
That is something I think they forget. They've hijacked our flag, which was originally sewn by a woman, to represent the country, and they're hijacking that at the same time they try and limit our rights. They say, oh, only Republicans love and support the military, at the same time that they're defunding everything and cutting staffing and tying a bill specifically to DoD funding in the hopes of sliding it through so that people feel guilty over how it will affect the military. Using the military, using our service members as pawns like that. It's insulting. And I just hate that that's where our morals stand at this point in the country, that we've reached this point. So we have hit our hour. Does anyone have anything else they want to say to inspire people to vote? What is the biggest issue you're maybe voting for this year, or anything you're excited about?
I wanted to piggyback off of something that that Chloe said about encouraging. I hope everybody listening, it feels inspired to vote after being on this call and hearing about all of the, the impacts that are happening for this community. But I think one of the biggest things we can do is, yes, vote, but also talk to other people about voting. I think especially veteran voices, military family voices are so powerful and respected in communities. And so when you reach out and say, I voted, are you registered to vote? Like, make sure you're registered to vote. Remind folks. I know the VMF caucus is gearing up to do voter registration, especially around some of these overseas bases where there are, these populations who are trying to overcome these barriers. So I think that's going to be one of the things keeping me activated this year. Every time I'm angry it's like, every time we get angry, let's register somebody to vote. I think that's the answer.
That's a really good way to put it. Has the date been set for the voter registration?
Oh, for events? No, we're going to be coordinating. Going out through the year. So, check in with the caucus, and we'll keep folks updated on those events as they go on the calendar.
Excellent.
Yeah, I will just say that, like, what you do matters. And you don't have to be the loudest person in the room, which I don't know what that's like because I'm always the loudest person in the room. But you don't have to be the loudest person to make a difference. Your voice matters. What you do matters. So like I said, talking to those people, showing up for your community in small ways, it makes such a difference. So yeah.
Well, at the GWC, we do have events coming up. We have, I'm going to do our shameless plug session now. We have in February, we will be doing another live with the Global Black Caucus. for Black History Month. We also have on March 1st, we are doing a conversation about surviving as a woman in America with Alicia Andrews, which we're really excited about. On March 8th, we are doing our Feminist Hackathon, which is an all-day event to help people mobilize, give them the tools, the support, brainstorming. There are a lot of smart minds. Let's stick them all together with various challenges. It's going to be fun. It's going to be active. And we're looking forward to it. And then on March 17th, we have a panel about the tradwife movement and how it's presented as a cozy and soothing image that is so buried in patriarchy and the alt-right movement. All of those can be found on our website. If you go to democratsabroad.org under caucuses, you'll always be able to see events according to which caucus is running them, and you can RSVP. And we like to start the conversations, I think, is the key thing. That's what we did here tonight. And I hope people take this and go out and talk about it more.
Great.
Okay.
Right.
Thanks so
Thank
much
you
for
for
having
joining
us.
us, Libby.
Yeah, this was fantastic. Thank you all for lifting up these veteran and military family issues.
I think it's really important.
Yeah.
We all
Thank
at the GWC, we all do, and we were really excited when you agreed to talk to us. So
Yeah, this is really great. You're just, so informative of you, Libby and Chloe. Thank you so much. And Jasmine, obviously, you're moderating, making things going. But thank you so much. It's been really just wonderful.
everyone have a great night. If you're not following us, to any viewers, if you're not following us, please follow both us and the Democrats Abroad Veterans and Military Families Caucus on Facebook. Both of us are on Instagram. The Global Women's Caucus is also on most any other platform you can come up with. And we hope to see you again soon. Have a great night.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you. Bye.